Is vaccination compulsory or optional? Is vaccination legal? Is past vaccination legal? When did the governments of countries fear for our health and interests? The inquiry has returned with regards to whether immunization against the corona infection ought to be mandatory or discretionary. In the beyond couple of days, a huge number of adversaries of corona limitations and necessary inoculation rampaged in a few European urban areas. On Saturday, January 8, 2022, in a dissent development, some of which transformed into conflicts among dissidents and security men. France at the front. Furthermore, on Saturday, the biggest famous development in France, against the wellbeing endorsement and immunization against COVID-19, as 105,200 individuals partook in the showings against government measures, and the French Interior demonstrated that 3 exhibitions occurred in Paris, which included 18,000 individuals, notwithstanding to 7,200 others. They went out all through France. The tremendous showings came, as indicated by a few reports, because of proclamations by French President Emmanuel Macron, in which he designated the individuals who would have rather not get the antibody from the French, and Macron said in a meeting with the paper Le Parisien, "I truly need to inconvenience the existences of the unvaccinated. That is it until the end. That is the technique. I won't place them in prison, I won't immunize them. So we need to tell them, from January 15th, you will not have the option to go to an eatery, you will not have the option to have espresso in a bistro, or go to the theater or the film." Concerning Austria, which reported that it would make immunization mandatory, as of next February, an expected 40,000 demonstrators rampaged of the Austrian capital Vienna, conveying flags saying no to obligatory inoculation, lift limitations, and early races. The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, thought about that monumental inoculations was rarely okay, remarking on the thinking about certain nations to make immunization against the corona infection required. Bachelet said that these nations ought to guarantee regard for basic freedoms. In this particular situation, the responsible for crisis of the World Health Organization has focused on this. There is not a glaringly obvious explanation. To question the adequacy of the accessible immunizations against the Omicron freak, and Pfizer likewise affirmed the viability of its antibody against this new freak of the infection, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, approached nations considering making inoculation against COVID necessary, to guarantee regard for common liberties, focusing on that monumental antibodies was rarely adequate. The World Health Organization affirmed that there is no great explanation to question the viability of these immunizations against the freak Omicron. In a video message to a Human Rights Council discussion, Bachelet cautioned that there are significant basic freedoms contemplations that should be considered prior to making inoculation obligatory. Any required vaccination should take into account the standards of legitimacy, necessity, proportionality, and non-separation, he said. According to the recording message, by no means should individuals be compelled to get the antibody, she added. She brought up that the issue that nations considering forcing immunizations to secure the populace when Europe and different areas are confronting a far-reaching episode of the pestilence absolutely conveys the most elevated levels of authenticity and significance. However, she focused on that the obligatory utilization of immunizations ought to simply be utilized to accomplish. It should likewise be viewed as just one less meddlesome measures, for example, wearing covers and social removing neglect to meet such well-being needs, she added. It likewise expressed that for any limiting strides to be okay, nations should guarantee that antibodies are really accessible and inside the actual reach of the populace. What's more, she focused on that the antibodies utilized are sufficiently protected and viable to accomplish general well-being objectives. She noticed that any immunization framework should be sufficiently adaptable to take into account fitting exemptions, for example, cases in which an antibody is restoratively precluded for a person. She noticed that it could be suitable to force limitations on specific privileges and opportunities, including expecting immunizations to get to schools, emergency clinics, and other public spots. Nonetheless, she focused on that mandatory immunization was rarely okay, regardless of whether the individual's refusal to agree with the obligatory inoculation strategy had other legitimate results, including, for instance, the inconvenience of fines. At the point when punishments are forced, they should be proportionate and liable to audit by the legal specialists, she said.